Actually, I gave my story another title, which was only at the last moment added to the program, The Moral Ontology of Human Nature Relations in Placide Tempels' Bantu Philosophy, an answer to the climate crisis, question mark. So we're going here from the present day research, the empirical philosophy that Tai is carrying out, to book knowledge, which I gathered by studying an old book from the colonial age by Placide Tempels, the book Bantu Philosophy. Placide Tempels was a Belgian missionary working in the Congo and being frustrated about the little progress the missionary work made of really converting people to Christianity. He decided, also on advice of a friend he met there, a magistrate also from Belgium, to first study the basic ideas of what was then called the Bantu peoples. Now we say speakers of Bantu languages. We don't use the word Bantus as in South Africa they did in the apartheid system, but I use the word because the book is called like that. So he wrote a book called Bantu Philosophy, and just last year I got the chance to publish a new Dutch version of the book. So he was Flemish speaking, and I updated it to more current academic and readable Dutch. And let me say something first, a bit more about Placide Tempels and his book, and then return also to the title, The Moral Ontology of Human Nature Relations. And from there, I go to my second point to tell something about the aims of this book, Bantu Philosophy. And I will round off by advocating for looking at the African reactions to the book. So I work already for many years on this book and with a growing group of people. And one of them is also here and will be speaking in a panel, Pius Mosima. We work together at present on a new French and English translation of this originally Dutch book. When it appeared first in a French translation. And that French translation was in 1945, so at the end of the Second World War. And a year later, he published his Dutch version because he was frustrated with the translation. And the Dutch translation, the Dutch version has the words originele tekst, original text. But that French translation persisted and was later used as the basis of all the other translations that have been made. There's an Italian translation, a Spanish translation, a Portuguese translation, and an English translation. The English translation has been most widely read nowadays by African philosophers and is, I think, even more problematic than the French one. Whole sentences are cut out, different technical concepts are conflated into one, etc. So the philosophical nature of the book is, distorted. So that is my passion, to bring a new source to the field, especially for African philosophers who mostly know this work. It's less known in Europe and in the English-speaking world here, the Euro-American world, as we call it. But I think it is interesting globally. I've also done with also Pius Mosima and several honor students who have worked with me, a lot of archival work here in Belgium in the KADOC archive in Leuven, where all the missionary archives are gathered. And from there, I tried to develop a better understanding of the crossroads of the time in which the book was written, to better value why Placide Tempels made certain choices in writing it. Now, that's but most I can tell for now because I have only 20 minutes and time is already running short. There was a bit about the book and why I study it. Now, the moral ontology of human nature relations, that has to do with the topic of my talk, and also is a kind of critique on how we often speak about environmental ethics, climate crisis, environmental philosophy. It sometimes gives me the feeling that only in a time of crisis, and it was already said that only very late environmental ethics has been developed by Professor Coles. Only when we're in crisis, when we see that things are going wrong, we start to reflect on what are we doing. And I think that African philosophy, and it was also very beautifully portrayed in the research by Tai, that this African indigenous thought is very strongly focused on the human nature relations. So not so much like, oh, we have to do something, but how do we relate to all the other creatures around us who we live with together in a network, actually, as the spider image of the conference folder shows. The folder also has a quote from Placide Tempels, from the bad English translation still, but that sentence was okay. The world of forces is held like a spider's web, of which no single thread can be caused to vibrate without shaking the whole network. So this African indigenous philosophy is much more reflective on human nature relations, and in that sense goes back a step before doing ethics, so to speak. It's ontological. It's just before we have the crisis to solve, we already want to know how we live with the others and what would be good in that sense. So moral ontology, how are we with them and what is good in that being with them before we say, oh, someone is suffering and we have to solve it. Now, from here, I go to my second point in my talk. There are three, as you remember. What were the aims of this book, Bantu Philosophy, in that colonial situation, the late colonial situation? I think not many people in that day had the idea that the colony of the Belgian Congo would only last for 15 more years. But for those who were critical of the colonial situation, they may already have seen the signs. But many people thought the Belgians would stay there longer. And I've read also reactions on decolonization from older people in the Congo who reflected back on the decolonization process. And they were also surprised that all the Belgians left because they were owned for equal participation in the government and in all the functions that were there. They wanted a non-racist society. They didn't want Belgians to leave per se. Some would maybe, but so there you see already that kind of fear of many of the colonizers, like, oh, when we're not in government anymore and we've done some things that people may not like, so let's better leave now. So in that situation, before the decolonization, people still believed in Belgium and in other colonizing nations in educating and civilizing colonized people from their culture, their religion, etc. And here we have Placide Tempels describing what is the indigenous thought, what is the ontology of the understanding of these Bantu peoples. So the work created a lot of reactions, but he had mainly three aims with this book. That's not only based on my reading of the book, but also of the archival research. So the main thing he wanted to show is that this ontology, which is often characterized by this one term, vital force, was an awareness of a kind of life energy or vital force that flows through all being. So it animates all beings in their, what he calls essential being. Um, for the Dutch speakers, in their wezen. That's hard to translate in English, but I would translate as essential being. It is an inner individual core, so to speak. Everyone has this kind of self-awareness of their inner core, and that inner core is sustained by vitality, life. And where does this life comes from, this energy? It comes from God, according to Tempels, of course. He was a Catholic priest, but he also had the impression with all the conversations with the people he lived with in the Congo that they would also say it comes from God, or their idea of God. But this energy is conducted, so to speak, like electricity through networks. So it's not like flowing like a waterfall, but it's conducted through networks. And these networks you can see in the Bantu society. So it flows from the divine, highest being, through spiritual beings, divinities, through the founders of the society, the elders, the ancestors, then to the parents, and from the parents to children, and from say farmers to their domestic animals and their plants who they take care for. They would also reflect in your experience of the Oromo people, maybe. Um, and but it's not only a kind of hierarchical um, uh, structure, although he calls it a hierarchy, but him using the image also of the spider's web suggests more of a kind of network that goes in all directions and that also receives impressions from all the points of the network. So that was his first goal, to describe this Bantu ontology, as he called it. But why did he do it? Not only to better missionize them, but from his letters and conversations, you also see that he wanted to provide the Bantu with the Bantu peoples with a cultural or spiritual defense against what he saw as empty modernization. Because what did colonial entrepreneurs do and governors? Build mines, build factories, and use them for products in modern life. And he saw that as only an attempt to increase material progress. But the material progress, of course, for the colonized went hand in hand with a lot of suffering as well. When you had to live in a mining town, it was shacks for thousands of little houses there without trees or other natural beauty. It was more of a sacrifice to work for modernization. But also in Europe, he saw that as not a good development. He doesn't write explicitly about the Second World War, but you may imagine that the whole destructive use of modern weaponry, etc., is also a very evil aspect of what we call modernization. So he had this idea, when we just don't throw their indigenous ideas away and try to transplant them with Western ideas, as many missionaries and educators wanted, but if we also value their indigenous philosophy and their indigenous understanding of the world, they have their own pride, so to speak, they can value life from their own perspective and feel more agency in dealing with us Europeans. So that was his second aim. And writing that book, he tried to promote that. The third aim was that he also thought that Westerners could learn from African philosophy. And what could they learn? That a different way of life is possible. not only focused on progress or development, but also on things like reverence for natural relations, our own, for our own being and that of others around us, human and non-human, and for everyone's essential being. And that essential being, if you remember from the beginning, is being alive, but not being alive as surviving, like I'm not yet killed, I'm still here, and not just like understood as securing survival, which you often hear in environmental ethics. What can we do to prevent the apocalypse or the end of human life or whatever? That is not a goal in this type of thinking, in this indigenous thinking. The goal is to sustain life as good life. Yes, with others. That is being alive, enjoying life with others. And I think that he was very much, he had become a student of that type of life and that type of thought and wanted to bring it across to other Europeans. Now, I said in the beginning that it's also important, and that's my third point, and it can be very brief, to read this book, this old book, with African thinkers. And there have been many African philosophers who wrote about it. There's a whole debate about that book going on for 80 years. I will not go into that, but I want to focus on one early reaction. Many Africans in that period were anonymous to the European public, but with the help of another scholar, Eva Schalbroek, I have found out that one of the people from Congo that Tempels mentioned, Ngandu, was Étienne Ngandu. He was an educated Congolese. Apparently he worked as a medical assistant. They couldn't become, the indigenous people couldn't become doctors, but they could be medical assistants, any kind of local chief or leader of a community. And Ngandu obviously had conversed with Placide Tempels, and he read the book. And then he wrote this, and I put a quote also in my little summary. Your book on Bantu philosophy expresses many truths, but it arrives rather late. That is, after many good things have been destroyed. So that was a bit of a harsh critic. Yeah, I like it, but yeah. Well, what good is it now to elevate the values of indigenous philosophy, whereas we were all have been kind of drawn away from it, and Western education poured into our brains, and people being brought to cities or mining camps and not living in their indigenous villages anymore, where these relations were revered and celebrated. So I think this one quote, although Ngandu wrote a longer reaction on the book, is very significant for us now. When we return to these philosophies and these values, is that it's too little too late, or should we do it especially because we are already too late, because the climate crisis is already so bad? I think it is, we are in a way, that's my personal view, beyond trying to fix the climate crisis. And therefore, I think it's even more important to try to turn around and start to reflect differently on human nature relations, and try to revere our relations with each other and also with other natural beings more, and celebrate this being alive together more. And I will leave it here. I hope I kept into the time. Thank you.